Hello and welcome back to APIs You Won't Hate. My name is Mike Bifulco. I'm one of your APIs You Won't Hate co-hosts. I am lucky to be hanging out today with my APIs co-founder, Phil. Phil Sturgeon, how are you doing today?
Hello, I am doing all right. I'm wet North Wales, hiding out from the weather. We got a big old
Well,
storm coming.
yeah, gosh, it must be the depths of winter there. I'm sure it's plenty chilly for you right now, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad to have you here. I'm glad to be able to sit down and talk. And you and I actually today are going to be speaking with a guest. We have Rich Steinmetz on the call today. Rich, how are you doing?
Yeah, hey, all good from my side as well. I'm here in sunny Barcelona. It's been constantly
Ah,
sunny as always,
rub it
so
in.
My jealousy is infinite. Rich, you have been a community member with APIs You Won't Hate for as long as I can remember, and I feel like your name and your voice have appeared quite a bit in our world. But I feel like I also wouldn't quite do justice to explain just everything that you work on. Can you give a little background on yourself and kind of the things that you do in and out of APIs?
yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks a lot for having me on. I'm a listener of the podcast since probably 4 or 5 years, so it's basically one of the places that got me into the whole API thing. So it always surprises me how it is when you listen to a podcast or watch a show, and then all of a sudden you're there. So thanks
I
for
think that
having me.
officially makes you an OG too. If you've been around for 4 or 5 years, you've been with us since pretty early on.
Yeah, I think it's pretty much from the start.
Nice. Just
And
be ready for how weird it gets when you kind of, you do this recording, you pop off, you forget about it, and then however long it takes us to actually get this one out, you'll be minding your own business one day and you'll hear your voice coming in through your headphones. You're like, I was just trying to listen to the podcast and it's me. Ah. So just skip that one.
yeah, that's a scary one for sure. But I'm looking forward to that. I I'm not from an engineering background. I did get into engineering about like 9 to 10 years ago, and I, obviously I didn't know what I'm doing. I tried a bunch of different things, worked in different software teams from the beginning as well, and different technologies from Cake to Cake PHP, like from PHP to Java to Python. And one day I had a contract in the Ruby Rails space, and there I thought, yeah, that's a cool technology, that's a cool community, I want to stay here. And I was always a back-endy guy, so although I built full stack from like infrastructure to front end, I still in the years before I touched and created APIs a lot for one reason or another. But then with this contract, this Rails contract 5 years ago, for the first time, I worked in a team that they had an interesting setup. Actually, they had on the front end, they had a Rails app, and on the back end, they had it's called Grape API. It's like a framework in Ruby to create APIs. And it was the first contract where I realized that APIs are like a discipline, like it's something you can get into and be like get good at and can learn more about. And there I learned things like designing an API, and they had like a Swagger UI for the front end app to communicate with the back end. So, and this is where I met you guys on the podcast with my ears at least. And this is where I started to get deeper into APIs and like read books about it, and yeah, follow the different shows and understanding like the business aspect of it, technical aspect of it, the design aspect of it. And yeah, 5 years forward, I had only Rails, Ruby on Rails, and API contracts ever since. And I'm now helping to build the business operating system API for Clickfunnels. It's a company basically provides the software for entrepreneurs, for solopreneurs, bootstrappers, but nowadays also for all kinds of companies to run their business on and basically have everything related to marketing and shops and customer management running inside.
Thank you. That's super helpful. I am the first to say that I understand marketing technology at like, let's call it a 100 level. I'm not super versed in marketing stuff, but I'm also a victim of it fairly often, meaning I get to be an end user of it as a developer for my team at Craftwork. Um,
Yeah.
and it's something that I find really fascinating. For the uninitiated, there is an incredible amount of technology that goes into making sure that money spent on ads, for example, is being spent well and being used to target fundamentally better audiences each day or week or cycle, however that works. But then there's a lot of information that goes into tracking people's journey through a site. So how does someone reach your website and then get from wherever they got to you to spending money, presumably, or creating an account or whatever the goal is? And I think on some level, that's kind of what ClickFunnels does. Is that vaguely right?
Yes, we do have a good analytics like module where you can follow your customer's journey through your funnels. Like the meat of the software it's in the name. It's the funnels. It's like a page builder for you to create your offer, or well, you create your offer in your mind, in the background, on paper, on the whiteboard, and then you make it visible for others in the software. And it's basically, there is a page builder for that. And then you can have a bunch of different automations. For example, I think for Craftwork, you have or will have a subscription, right, Mike? Or is it
Actually,
one-time payments?
yeah, it's one-time payments. So we're a B2C company. We do home painting, so we're not a SaaS
Yeah.
at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, you do home paintings, and then now imagine you have your offer there. Hey, I have these amazing paintings in here, and then someone buys your offer. Let's say you have like a fixed price on it for this particular funnel, and then they are redirected to another page where you can provide them with more services that they need. Maybe, I don't know if they really need it, if you do like everything, but theoretically you could sell them the tools to do the painting. Well, you'll be doing it, of course, as a service,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
just as an example.
Yeah, of course. And so ClickFunnels helps you to understand that process and hopefully send people in the right direction.
Exactly. And then you can have all kinds of automations around that. And of course, going back to analytics, it's an important part to understand like where in your funnel, and your funnel can consist of a couple of steps. It can be very simple, but it can be also very complex with like split testing and all kinds of things.
And imagine when it comes down to it. So I'm sitting on ClickFunnels homepage right now, and there is a massive grid of features here, many, many different things that ClickFunnels seems to build and make available to customers. All of these things probably have to talk to each other on some level. Is that where your work comes in?
Yeah, exactly. Like we have all these features, and it's actually a funny story. This software exists for 10 years now, more or less. And they began mostly just being a funnel builder, like page builder, website builder. And at some point, 5 years or so forward, like 5 years ago, they decided to do like a ClickFunnels 2.0, like a second version. And one of their like huge factors was the technical aspect of how their app was built in terms of API ecosystem, like everything around. When I say API ecosystem, I'm thinking about like webhooks, the public API, of course, like the platformability of your app, like other apps connecting to your app. That was a huge factor because the infrastructure or the technical architecture there in the first version wasn't set up in a way that was easy. They had like the old version of the API. So basically to provide a much better experience for their users, give them even more power in terms of automations that they get with the webhooks and a public API, and to also enable partnerships they had like this big factor. Hey, let's build an API ClickFunnels 2.0, and let's make the API ecosystem awesome. Like there was a lot of thought going in from the beginning into how to build it and make it in a way that it's like a platform. And it really shows fruits now, because you were at their main page probably at like clickfunnels.com. If you would look for like developers.myclickfunnels.com, you would see our developer hub, and there you can see the different resources that that relate to the features, of course, on clickfunnels.com, but then also that are used by our partners or by our like power users, and just also developreneurs or entrepreneurs who are very techy.
I feel like I've gone further and further down the rabbit hole here, and I'm finding more as I go. It's a good product.
That's why I've been quiet for a while, because I've just been clicking around the website going, oh man, this is going to solve a lot of problems. Whenever I look at a product at the moment, I'm kind of thinking how it would work for Protect Earth. And I think one of the problems we've got is, we're like a tiny little startup growing rapidly as a kind of reforestation charity. And there's so many different bits of software, and we've got like a website on Squarespace, and you can sponsor trees via the Shopify store, which kind of we have to manually try and look a bit similar. And you can schedule appointments and CRM stuff with HubSpot, and you could, we've got MailChimp for doing email marketing, but we've also got SendGrid for kind of programmatically sending emails, and there's 100 different things in here, and it looks like you guys do basically all of it. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so this is exactly the vision, to have like the business operating system, like to have everything in one place working together and in an automated way, so you don't have to switch between the tools, you don't have to connect them, because probably if you have those different tools, you probably also go from time to time and use something like Zapier maybe to
and a bunch of them charge extra for the integration. I think like DonorBox, our donation platform, I've been looking to replace that for a while, because Stripe are already taking whatever reduced charity rate fee they take, but then DonorBox take another percentage of that. And sometimes someone wants to bring in £1,000 and we lose like 50 or 60 or something. And tracking analytics is a massive pain in the backside. Fathom, who are amazing sponsors of the charity, have given us like a free analytics thing, but it's pretty basic because we've not managed to integrate all of the correct tracking links between Squarespace, going to DonorBox, and joining it all up with that. So yeah, I think the integrations, when free, require a little bit of work to make work properly, and sometimes aren't free. It's expensive and more work. So yeah, it's interesting to see someone trying to tackle all of this at once, which cannot be easy.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of the features are also quite new, and there's a lot in the pipeline as well. But we are now at a point that we zoom into making them awesome on the UI side or on the API side. So yeah, in terms of features, I don't think it will not grow like horizontally anymore a lot, I think, from what I see, but we'll just like double down on what we have now in the coming time.
Yeah. How is it? What form does it take? Like, is it basically a big old CMS with lots of modules, or is it something that is a kind of a toolkit that you're meant to plug into some sort of site yourself?
It's just a UI with you start out basically when you do the free trial, for example, you start out and with a screen and a couple of apps predefined for you, like let's say like funnels are native, and then you can pick and choose what kind of an app. It's structured in an appy way, and then you go to the apps menu and say, hey, I want like to know more about analytics. So you pick the app, and then it's just part of your dashboard, and you can just come back to it.
Oh, I got you. And there's a website editor where you are picking a theme, and then all of those themes will support all of the built-in apps, I'm guessing. So you can just kind of add in whichever apps, and it will have an interface for that bit.
Exactly. Yeah, there's an editor, like the whole funnel thing is its own app. So there's an editor website. You connect a domain, you can connect the domain to it, and then you are provided with a domain, like with Clickfunnels domain first, and then you can just connect yours.
Do you have any integration with like random APIs? So could I dynamically fetch data into one of these pages from my own API, or would that be something else?
You mean whether
So
you
like
could
right
pump
now
in
I've got,
data from...
yeah, exactly. I'm just turning this into free consulting now. Cheers. So for a common problem that I have with CMSs that try to do quite a lot, or any sort of kind of SaaS that does quite a lot, is that the more stuff they do, the better, but you always find, the end of it somewhere. And we've got loads of projects, right? Like every site that we create a new woodland at is another project. And I've just spent the last week or two hiring a guy to kind of do manual data entry into our Squarespace website, because there's no way to dynamically pull in the information. And I'm like, man, I should be doing better than this. I should not be hiring someone to manually do data entry on a website when all of this data already lives in an API, but also we're quite busy planting trees. And I think my point is, is there any way to get kind of custom data into it somehow?
Do you have like an example of what kind of data it would be?
If I've got an API with like name of project, description, number of trees planted, and here are some photographs.
So it's kind of custom data, right? It's not something that's
Yeah.
part of ClickFunnels already. I know that like can have, the first thing I'm thinking about here now is like Salesforce. They have these, and their APIs are very heavy to work with, but they have this like, maybe also HubSpot if I remember correctly, but they have these objects you can create and you can name them whatever you want and things like that. Is that what you would look for?
Yeah, I've worked with that sort of integration in the past. That's quite clever, and I was quite impressed, even though it's cumbersome. Like in Salesforce, you can define custom objects in there that are like represented as OData, and therefore you can say that lives over here on my API, and then it kind of does some syncing in the background or whatever, because it's OData, it knows what structure it is and what types are and everything else. Yeah, I suppose that sort of thing.
No, we don't have that. We have the resources that we provide on the API, like we basically hook in to what we offer in the app, and that's basically...
Oh, I gotcha. So I can integrate kind of products and courses and all of the various different app bits. I could use an API to stick some stuff in there.
Exactly, like contacts, products, CRM. You can do even fulfillments via the API. We have an amazing new feature, which is like creating orders via the API.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that's helpful.
Yeah. So
there's I always like to find the limitations of a thing to help people get context of like where it sits, but there's plenty on here which will cover the vast majority of needs, because not everyone runs a reforestation charity.
So, Rich, I happened to stumble across the changelog on the developer side of ClickFunnels, and I've noticed your name is under most of the changelog entries of late, for the past few months at least. One of the things I'm curious about is, especially like, as Phil's mentioned, there's so many things, you're serving so many different use cases here. How is your team identifying what to work on next? And how do you balance, the change of a feature with all the users who must be consuming the things that you've built?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like our API launched almost 2 years ago, and like end of September, somewhere 2023, I launched the second version of the API. And since then, it has evolved. So we went from, hey, let's give our user what we know they'll be using for sure. Let's give them like a basis. And we basically decided ourselves, like business decided together with the engineering team, what it will be. They have always spoken a lot to customers. And so we're just shipping the thing that we need that will have broad application. And at some point, this shifted a little bit in terms of we went more into shipping for our partners. And as people started using the API more, they were requesting things more. So we had direct feedback via the different channels. We also encourage people to have feedback for us. So they come via support, or we started early on to foster this discussion, as you said, in the change log. Like that would be like the passive consumption of what's going on.
Mhm.
But we also early on went into having like a discussion forum, so people have a place where they can have questions or doubts. And then again, our API users, they aren't all necessarily like the hardcore developers who are hired to do the thing with Salesforce, for example. Our API users are a lot more, I think, compared to, for example, Salesforce, are a lot more just like solopreneurs who are techie and they want to build that thing real quick. By fostering that discussion in different channels, we also have like a feature board, and these are all the places basically like our partners who integrate with us, and there are quite a lot of them who basically with whom we have synergy, right? Like this is a big thing, I think, in the API space, like the business aspect of the APIs. If you provide like a good platform that can be easily OAuth to, that exposes a lot of like API features, then you have the synergy with other partners and you can kind of propel your both businesses and your both customers in terms of like value.
I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about how the product is built in the backend? Like what tools are you using to manage and maintain the API?
That's a good question as well. Clickfunnels is built on Ruby on Rails.
Okay.
Additionally, it's also built on Bullet Train. So Bullet Train is an open source SaaS building framework on top of Ruby on Rails. And it's basically like Ruby on Rails on steroids for SaaS. The creator of this framework, Andrew Culver, and the open source team who's working on it, they have created this pretty cool starter kit for SaaS and for APIs as well. It's funny that it was ahead of its time a little bit in the Ruby on Rails space, because in the enterprise world where different technologies play a bigger role, like Java and C# and wherever, and even Python, like in where microservices play a bigger role, it's more common to build something like API first. Would you agree? Like, because Ruby on Rails is more like SaaS web applications.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a lot more kind of let's sit around and spend a year planning this thing in those enterprises, just because of the nature of the size of company, and they want to make sure they get it right. You know, they're often a bit less agile, a bit more waterfall, because they are going to spend like sometimes literally 6 months to a year like planning what they need and involving stakeholders before they even kind of get around to writing any code. Whereas I am consistent, previous jobs where Rails has been the thing, you would be in a meeting talking about what we might need from this API, and someone's already started typing Rails new into their command line. Like they will not stop coding because of the kind of agile nature of it all, and the fact that there are like generators and scaffolders. People will immediately try and just be like hit. Well, you've mentioned these 5 resources. I've already made the controllers for them. The API is basically done. What are we talking about? So
the funny thing, you mentioned scaffolds, like it's a console command for anyone who's not into like Rails and this stuff, where you just type it in and it creates like controllers, models, like a bunch of code that you would write manually in other languages and frameworks. And like Bullet Train has super scaffolds, so it provides you with extra functionality, a lot of UI things already built in. So it's pretty cool. And yeah, it's cool that you agree that there is like more dynamicity with like in Ruby and Rails teams, maybe also in PHP teams or like some other tech bubbles. Yeah,
That seems to be a pattern that's found some favor with people, especially with getting off to the races quickly. You can, like Phil was saying, Rails new is a funny shortcut for just like, I'm going to build the thing. I've got the solution. It's coming. And scaffolding is kind of halfway in between, where you may be growing your understanding of the thing and you can use a scaffold to create all of the CRUD stuff very quickly.
Yeah.
My understanding of super scaffolding is that it's make the CRUD stuff so that your web app has all of the views for a list and a show and an edit, but also that you now have an API that does those same things too.
Oh yeah. How do you know this? Have you worked with Bullet Train?
I haven't worked with Bullet Train, but at Craftwork, we're building our product on top of Rails. So I've done a bunch of research about Rails API providers and patterns. And I think one of the interesting things about Ruby on Rails is that for a framework that is so hell-bent on having like the Rails way to do everything, when it comes to APIs, there isn't really a fully formed opinion. And there's many types of ways of kind of getting to what feels like a similar end result, enough to the point where it feels like maybe that should just be somewhat standardized at this point too. And super scaffolding seems to come up every time I look up, how do I make a nice REST API using my Rails app?
This is exactly where I was saying that Bullet Train was a little bit ahead of its time in the Ruby and Rails space because of its dynamicity, because of how the Rails main driver company, which is like Rails is open source, right? And behind Rails, like the main core contributors are from the Rails creator, basically, who's like DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen. He's the founder or creator of Rails, and his company is basically the main driver of this technology. And if you look at their API, you might have like Basecamp is one of their apps. If you look at the Basecamp latest API v4, you might get an idea why Rails API standardization is in the state that it's currently in. Because it's funny, it's actually funny. Their API is basically, it's hosted on GitHub. It just examples with some text. And I'm not sure they are auto-generating anything. Maybe they are, but in the end, it's just like example response, payload, and text. So they haven't ever, I think, I'm looking this up like a couple of times a year, probably every year for the last 5 years. And I don't think they ever, with any of their products, they went into like generating an open API schema, providing like a developer hub or anything. So they never got into this stuff. So it never became part of the Rails core framework. And
yeah, I think he's a bit busy writing fascist manifestos to get down to writing any open API. But it would be nice to see a little bit more effort put into actually describing any of the APIs involved properly. Because it has just been the classic like worst possible example of here is a URL, here is some stuff you might throw at it. We're not going to describe any of the data types or validations or anything that you'll actually need, and just go figure it out and see what happens. Because I forget the name of the term. I think it's Hiram's law, or I'm just getting it wrong and I'm Googling frantically. But the law that any part of an interface can and will be used as an API. Yeah. There, I actually got it right. Go me. I've said it to like 3 other people recently, so retroactively, that's good. With a sufficient number of users of an API, it does not matter what you promise in the contract. All observable behaviors of your system will be depended on by somebody. And so with Rails, because there are often a lot of different ways of doing something, and sometimes those things change, if you're not documenting the way that things should be done, and there are multiple ways of doing it, then you have no idea if you're breaking an API. Like the fact that Rails has from day one somewhat ruined the entire internet's understanding of the difference between a put and a patch, because there isn't one. It's just the same thing in Rails, right? And they've just never changed that. And the fact that sometimes they support like putting a .json on the end or a content type. Like there's a lot of these weird ways where they've just gone screw it both. And if that's not written down in a contract somewhere, you don't have a contract. You just have vibes that might shift and break everything. So I would like to see OpenAPI considered as important, not only to David Heil Hansen, but the companies that he works for and the core product itself,
Yeah, I'm on a mission actually to get it there. And Bullet Train is, and I don't know how many years it will take, but maybe someday. And Bullet Train, one more time, back to the ahead of its time thing, with the super scaffolding, it provides you with an API namespace. This is like the regular way. It's not classic API first development because it's not like a separate service. In the end, Rails is still like a monolith, but it gets like a touch of API first into the monolith, and you get the specific API version namespace in there. You have even the parameters are initially when you do the super scaffold, like the parameters of the domain code in the controllers makes use of the parameters in the API controllers, so that you kind of think from the beginning about, hey, what would be here, like something I can or should expose or shouldn't. And yeah, not to forget, there is the open API quote unquote problem, which in the Rails world, because it's an unsolved problem, I would consider it unsolved to generate your open API schema from code itself. I don't know, guys, do you agree that like in Python or like some typed languages, there are extremely solid open API generators? And I'm always saying like Fast API is the most prominent example, but do you agree that they are like kind of bullet, more or less at least?
No, I mean, every language has one framework that takes the view that open API is something that you should just vomit out after you've finished writing all of your code. And whether that's coming directly from the code because of types, or whether it's coming from annotations that are confusing proximity with accuracy, they kind of just, throw something out because they were told to and they couldn't be bothered to think about doing it first. And that is, helpful in some regards. But I think most frameworks have a way of ingesting open API, right? The API design first workflow being, I'm actually going to do this open API first, and then whatever code I end up using will simply be an implementation of this. Now going the full, like, I'm going to generate the entire code off of the open API, which is usually a bit of a faff. A lot of them have like server-side request validation so that you don't have to write that yourself and then make sure that it matches, because you can just say, hey, this middleware, can you validate the incoming request based off of open API and reject anything that's rubbish? And then they have like some other sort of like RSpec, unit testing extension that just says, oh, and hey, can you make sure that this response coming back matches the open API that said it should? And annoyingly, most frameworks have those sort of options, but there are always some random little plugin maintained by, some guy. And I think that more and more API frameworks, or any web application framework that wants to pretend that it's, focusing on APIs, needs to bring those into the core and make it incredibly easy and recommended to, instead of defining everything in some random DSL, you could simply point it at your open API and save writing all that code. I'd love to see Ruby do more of that, Rails do more of that, because there are really good extensions out there for that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing. Like, an RSpec, it's one of the best options right now in the Rails space, where you kind of write the tests first, and then it also generates an API schema from the test. But it's still a little bit of a DSL there, right? It's not really generating from code.
Oh yeah, sure. That's something different. That's RSpec is just a generic testing framework like PHP Unit or JUnit or just whatever test runner.
Yeah, I mean RSwag, yeah.
RSwag, yeah. I think that doesn't even support the latest versions these days, and they can't be interested in updating it. So mostly what I try and recommend to people is, instead of, some people don't like writing open API, and instead of writing open API, they write some other sort of awkward DSL, which then gets out of date because they've tried to simplify it by taking shortcuts, which then don't represent the full reality of open API. So honestly, just like learn to write it, or use Copilot to help you, or whatever. But my preferred thing is still like, just actually write the open API. It's portable. If you rewrite your version 2 of your API in whatever Go instead of Rails, then happy days. It's still exactly the same, and you have something there for breaking change detection, because you know that you haven't accidentally broken the API, because it's being tested and validated against the whole way. But that is probably a whole other episode, and one that we did recently, so I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's good stuff, because we also thought about testing this as an alternative approach. Like, what would be the cost of doing like this manually or design first versus having our own auto generation, which we have now, but it also comes with some things that need to be improved. Like the final vision of this is that the bullet train open API generation would have like the perfect generation generated from code and just like clean, cool generation from code. But yeah, that's the other thought experiment there. Like, what would it cost actually in comparison to us getting it there, the technology there? What would it cost to actually doing the design first thing?
So, Rich, I know you mentioned earlier in the chat that you have been doing some consulting work. My understanding is maybe at least that you may be working on ClickFunnels as a consultant there too. Are you working with folks currently outside of ClickFunnels? Are there projects you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my main consulting right now goes into the ClickFunnels business operating system API. And I'm super passionate about that project. But I'm also working together with people to help them create their apps marketing first in the Ruby and Rails space, because we as developers tend to develop a lot and keep our heads in the code a lot, but then we don't really think about the marketing aspect, unfortunately, a lot of times. So
Sure.
yeah, I'm working with developers and developreneurs to help them build their app marketing first, and maybe also some projects will come out backed by the ClickFunnels API to just see how you can delegate your user management to the API, to an API or to this API. So I'm working, that's one of my main projects right now.
I think that's something that I probably have shouted about on the internet infinitely for people building new products, is that marketing your thing is every bit as important as making it work. Because if you build a product and nobody knows about it, ain't nobody going to use it. And that's hugely problematic for a lot of founders who are super technically talented, but then never tell anyone what they're building. And there's no longer an if you build it, they will come. It's you got to do both now.
Yes. How many apps died because someone shipped an app, it's online, they dropped a link somewhere, and then no one registered.
So, Rich, what's the best way for people to find you online if they're interested in working with you?
Yeah, I'm also asking myself this sometimes because things change a lot. But I think one solid place is always the richstone.io/meet-rich. That's the place where I kind of share where I'm at right now and what channels are best to find me on. I'm also on X. Everywhere I'm richstone.io, basically.
That makes it easy. And I'll make sure to drop a link to your site in the show notes so people can find that as well. I've also jotted down a handful of things related to ClickFunnels and bullet train and the like. We'd love to have you come back sometime and wax philosophical a bit about Rails and Open API. I think that'd be a fun chat too.
That'd be awesome, yeah. And by the way, I just wanted to mention that the Ruby and Rails community, being like the web app framework and language, they will really appreciate the things that you are sharing and doing about like APIs and integrations. So it's good to have you more in our world as well.
Well, thanks so much. Yeah, I appreciate it. It is a hugely responsive community, and they're definitely very opinionated and nice to chat with too. People are pretty reasonable to talk through what they're working on and, you know, why they prefer this over that and so on. I'll find myself deeper and deeper in that as the days wear on, certainly too. All right, fellas. Well, let's call it a day from there. Thank you so much for hanging out. It's been really nice chatting with you. Rich, have a great day. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Phil, until next time, mate.
Yeah, see ya.